All right, hey guys. Today's lesson we're going to be talking about the rise of dictators. These um, individuals who took power of countries across the world and basically sent us on a crash course for war for the Second World War. All right, and as we begin going through and talking about this, I want to keep one thing in the back of your mind. Basically, the focus question of this entire PowerPoint in the next 10 minutes we're going to spend together is what allowed dictators to rise to power around the world. Okay, so I want you guys to always be thinking that, always keeping that in the back of your mind as we're going through here. All right. So the first question is, what is a dictator? What is it? What is this word? I know that I joke a lot about it. It must be this guy right here. Mean person, makes you turn in your homework on time. He seems like a dictator. We joke about it all the time. Some of you even call me a dictator. Merriam-Webster describes a dictator as a ruler with total power. Well, still speaking about me, over a country. Darn it, not me. I don't have power over a country. And he's also typically one who has obtained power by force. Unfortunately, that's not me either. So obviously, I cannot be a dictator. Instead, a dictator is somebody like Joseph Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Union from approximately 1925 up until the 1960s, responsible for killing close to 40 million people. I haven't done that. You can also talk about Saddam Hussein, who most of you might realize from the most recent war in Iraq that we had. He was a dictator of Iraq, launched a war against Kuwait in the early 1990s to start the first Gulf War, and then we invaded again in the early 2000s because we believed that he had weapons of mass destruction. Again, we might also be talking about Adolf Hitler here. If you thought Adolf Hitler, you were right. Today, though, we're not going to be talking about him. We're going to devote that to the next video to be made, all right? But the question that we always ask ourselves is, and this is true whether we're talking about Stalin, Saddam Hussein, or Hitler, why? Why do these dictators, how do these dictators come to power, okay? How is it that, we sit here and we look at these dictators and we say, God, they were horrible people. How did these people follow them? Well, it's actually kind of really simple. Radical problems. Each of these countries that we're going to look at has a radical problem going on. There's some major issue that the people of that country are facing. And the thing is that these people, they want answers. They want solutions. And these dictators give them radical solutions to solve their radical problems. If we look in context of these countries we're going to talk about, and especially after World War I, we begin to see that the world is in a state of disaster, all right? The traditional powers are gone. The people who had always kept the world together, Britain, France, and Germany, had been completely dissolved, all right? And without these traditional people who had always been there in charge, most of the people were confused. They didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to act. They didn't know what was going on. It was as if one day, all of a sudden, every teacher in school was gone. What would school be like? Well, it'd be complete chaos. Traditional countries were completely divided up. Some countries were made into 3, 4, 5 different countries. On top of that, now you have an economic depression. We're going to talk a little bit more about that tomorrow in class. But we sit here and we think, depression, we think the American depression was bad. European depression was going from 1923 all the way up until the start of the war. And then most importantly, though, fear. These people were scared. Europeans were scared. Russians were scared. Italians were scared. Japanese were scared of what the future had. Okay? So importantly, we need to realize that people were looking for answers and solutions to their radical problems. And these individuals gave them those answers. They gave them those solutions. They may have been radical and they may have been completely bad and horrible and wrong to us, but to these people who were desperate, they were answers. They were something that they could cling to. So as we begin, let's look at the first one. The first dictator to really rise is going to come out of Russia. One thing we need to understand about Russia is that Russia is extremely far behind other countries, okay? So while you're out there driving your Lexus and BMW, Russians would still be driving their Ford Model T from the 1920s. It was very backwards. Their industry was not developed. While the United States is using tractors and combines to do their farming, they're still going out in groups with axes and hoes and and other farming implements to do the same amount of work. Well, a group known as the Bolsheviks, okay, led by a man named Vladimir Lenin, they were upset. They were furious with what was going on in their country, and they decided to do something about it. And they're going to blame all of Russia's problems on the czars. All right, czars are basically kings or emperors. And this was the monarchy that ruled the country. And Vladimir Lenin and his Bolsheviks blamed the czars for everything. They said that you're the issue, you're the reason why we have so many issues, you're the reason why our country's so backwards. We want to get rid of you. And Lenin and his group, this Bolshevik group, is going to start a civil war in the middle of World War I. The middle of the largest war the world has ever seen. Lenin and the Bolsheviks believe, let's start a war in the middle of our own country. Sounds like a great idea. Okay? Well, actually it is, because Lenin and the boys, they're going to win. All right? They're going to overthrow the monarchy. They're going to overthrow the czars, and they're going to establish a new government. Well, the problem was Lenin was a communist. And as we talked about in the Roaring Twenties unit, communism was not a good thing to us in the United States. But to the people, Lenin promised to give them a better life. He promised to bring them into the fold. He promised to make their lives better than they could possibly imagine. He promised that everybody would be equal. There would be no more rich nobility lording over the poor and stealing everything from them. Everybody would be equal. Everybody got a car. Everybody got a house. And while to you and me that sounds like a pretty bad idea, if you're poor and destitute and you have no money, you have no food, and you're starving to death, that sounds like a great idea. All right. So that's how Vladimir Lenin is going to rise to power in Russia. And he's going to hand the torch off to Joseph Stalin here soon. But he's the first dictator that we needed to talk about. The second is in the country of Italy. Beautiful Italy. It's my favorite country in the world, by the way, but that's not important. Italy was on the winning side of World War II. Normally, a lot of people think that, chaos, fear, all these things that we said create a dictator, we're going to come from countries that lost World War I. But in fact, Italy was on the winning side. Italy gained a lot from World War I. But at the same time, despite them gaining a lot of stuff, the Italians were extremely scared of what they saw happening in Russia. They saw Vladimir Lenin overthrow the monarchy. They saw him overthrow the king, the czar, and the empress, if you will. And the Italians were very scared that communism was going to come to Italy. And they were fearful that was going to invade them, and they didn't want that. A guy by the name of Benito Mussolini is going to rise to power now. Now, Benito Mussolini is what we call a fascist, and I believe that fascist or fascism is one of your definitions. So we'll talk about that more tomorrow in class. But Benito Mussolini rises to power. He's a fascist, and he claims that he wants to rebuild Italy into the Roman Empire. And for those of you guys who don't know, Italy used to be the Roman Empire, the largest empire in the world. And it had always kind of been sitting in the back of the Italian people's minds that they want to rebuild and to get to be that once proud culture of Rome one more time. And so Benito Mussolini rises to power by claiming to be the only person who can stop communism from coming to Italy. He claims that he can rebuild Italy into this big, grand empire that it once was, also known as the Roman Empire. And he says, I'm the only one that can help you out. And people go, okay, make Italy great again. All right, let's see what happens. And then finally, the last one we're going to talk about is halfway around the world, and that's Japan. Okay, Japan was also on the winning side during World War I, so kind of throwing everything on its head here. The problem is that Japan was struggling horribly economically after World War I. Japan tried to industrialize. They tried to be like everybody else. They tried to build cars. They tried to build new technology. But the problem is Japan has no natural resources. And so they were forced to import all of their goods, which cost a lot of money. And for those of you guys who don't know, Japan has always had a very long and proud history and tradition that was generally paid for by samurai, this warrior group that ran Japan for hundreds and thousands of years. And this group, while they didn't really exist anymore, their descendants still existed. And these descendants began to blame their country's issues on civilian corruption, on the businessmen, on bending to the white man, as they want to say. And a guy by the name of Hideki Tojo, looks like somebody's grandpa, but he also killed close to 20, 30 million people, but we'll talk about that later, okay? Not so nice looking anymore, is he? Okay. Guy by the name of Hideki Tojo believed that Japan was supposed to control all of East Asia, that they believed that they were a superior race to all other Asians. And he and his military consorts want to build this huge empire that they can once again control and be lords and masters, if you will, and express their dominance over other people. Well, this all sounds good to the military, but the business people of this time said that's not how things work anymore. We negotiate and we create alliances and we create deals. That's a big problem when the person that you're trying to tell no to is holding a gun. And somehow, some way, the Prime Minister of Japan is mysteriously assassinated, and Hideki Tojo, remember that kind guy that looks like somebody's grandfather, is going to take control. And he wants to build this army, not army, he does want to build an army, but he wants to build this empire back up. And now no one's in his way. Nobody's going to stop him and his military from getting what they want to. And they're going to launch a series of wars in the 1930s to start conquering and taking over places like Korea and China and all of these other beautiful island nations of the Southeast Asia. All right. So as we wrap up here, okay, what is a dictator? It's that person who gains power by force, who gains power and authority by basically dominating somebody else. But first, though, to get to this point, dictators rely on radical problems. They rely on these huge issues that people are so desperate to have answered that they're willing to sacrifice and accept solutions that they normally would never have taken. All right. For example, Russia had a backwards economy. They had a horrible monarchy who oppressed their people, who kept them poor, who kept them on the verge of starvation. And their solution with Vladimir Lenin was communism. Everybody's equal. Everybody gets the same amount. Italy's problem was they were fearful of communism and that they would never be a great empire again, that they would never be as big and grand and wonderful as the Roman Empire. And Benito Mussolini came up with fascism. Fascism was going to keep communism out, and he was also going to build up their military so that they could go out and they could conquer other countries. And finally, Japan. Japan had a failing economy. It was costing them too much money, and they didn't believe that they were being respected by the outside world. And so their solution was to create a massive empire under the old samurai ways. They were going to conquer Southeast Asia, and they were going to show the world that they should be respected and that they were just as good as any other country. All right. So that's where we're going to wrap up today. We're going to talk about this more tomorrow. I hope that this is going to help us out. Okay. Now, if you guys found this interesting, if you liked, learning about this stuff, or if maybe you were confused and coming into class, you wanted some more answers, you can go to chapter 13, section 1 of your textbook, pages 454 through 457, because I know some of you guys have trouble finding it, using chapters and sections. There it is. If you guys need more reading, I know you guys checked out books today. I made sure of that. So there it is, guys. If you guys have problems or issues, shoot me an email. If not, I look forward to discussing this with you guys in class tomorrow. All right. Hope you guys have a good one. I'll talk to you later.